if any of you have tried to explain Headless to your family, it didn't go very well, right? Because it's about many heads, not just one head. This is a very, very common point of confusion. So I am going to take some time today to explain to you, sort of take you back to the original problem that this was meant to solve, and then we'll take it from there. I think it'll make a little bit more sense. Over the next 40 minutes, I'm going to help you understand the original problem that Headless was intended to solve, how that relates to microservices, and then how leaders like yourselves are partnering and with whom to deal with all this. Take a minute and just read that and see if you can spot what's missing. What's missing is your competitors. So the problem here is that customers, even without visiting your competitors, are getting their expectations set. So we've got to even the playing field. I'm going to start this talk by rewinding the clock 10 years ago. Life was different back then, and they had a huge problem. They knew this because of digital analytics, and I'll explain exactly what this huge problem was and how they knew about it. The digital presences were a disaster. Now, you had marketing folks creating great, compelling content, but it clicked over to this rows and columns e-commerce experience, which was very different than the awesome marketing experience, and you got abandonment. That was the problem. The problem was abandonment. This is what Adobe's site looked like. This is one of the sort of genesis examples of this problem. And what you see is along the top, beautiful, compelling content of boxes of software. People really liked boxes at that time. But then you clicked through, and that first click on the lower right, that was where you selected which country's store you wanted to get into. So I'm showing 3 pages here. The actual click-through was 12, and they didn't have single-page checkout at that time either. When you dug into it, you found out that e-commerce vendors were awful at experience. They weren't just not that good, they were awful. The marketing stacks were evolving, but the e-commerce folks, they just didn't have that in their DNA. They could scale, they could integrate, but as far as experience, they didn't have it. But they were kind of the stewards of this at the time. So they were failing on experience, and there was a ton of experience technology coming onto the scene. So the problem just exacerbated. And if you look on there, you see very little HTML. And this was showing up in everybody's lives, and it was cool, right? You're washing clothes, you hit the Tide button, but you're associating that awesome experience with one particular company. So that was a little bit of a problem. Everybody was connected back then. This is still true today. The numbers are getting larger and larger. And on top of it all, what we know is that customer experience, digital experience, is the key to business growth. But IT teams were falling all over themselves. They were handling tickets. They were handling customization requests. They knew, and it was kind of unspoken at the time, that the incumbent e-commerce providers were just not pulling it off. Now, you would see next new version slides and some really cool roadmaps, but you couldn't upgrade these things, so you couldn't get to it. The architects, and how many architects in the room right now? You guys solved similar problems to this with loose coupling, right? So it's very clear how to solve that problem. Okay, so to summarize the problem, we've got disconnected customer experiences that drop revenue. And by the way, 60% drop off on that Adobe click. We know this from the analytics. 60% of the funnel dropped off. There was no single vendor who could solve this problem. So that was a paradigm shift because everybody would go to, nobody ever got fired for buying one big provider. And then the problem gets compounded because you have touch points upon touch points upon touch points. And they're coming from people well outside the commerce realm. And then the MarTech 5000. There's just inundated with all this innovation from the ecosystem. This had the effect of turning the entire, this is my first headless pun, I hope it works, of turning the entire e-commerce vendor market on its head. Because nothing that they had in market worked anymore. Like, nothing worked. So that's the characteristics of a market that's ripe for disruption. Okay, so how do you solve this problem? So we know a couple ways of solving this. First, we know you can't have a single vendor. So we can't go try to roll everything up and put it out as a single suite anymore. You need APIs to decouple all of these components. And essentially, what this all looks like is the API economy. So we know what happens in the API economy. We know how innovation thrives. And we know how these components talk to one another. And this became the model. So Forrester's view of this is an digital experience architecture. And what you'll notice there is that little black box called transactions. That's the e-commerce stuff. It's subordinate to experience. That's the key. E-commerce is subordinate to experience. All right. For those who've done this, and this was how the Adobe guys solved their problem, they know it converts. When they took that 60% drop off in the funnel and they fixed it, the funnel normalized. So they know it converts, which means it makes money. And it's touchpoint agnostic. And frankly, the rest of the software industry was doing this. So this was not proprietary to e-commerce. This paid off really, really well for the digitally advanced. It didn't quite work out so well for the laggards. The laggards had pain. The users had pain, folks building sites. And the vendors, the laggards, had pain. They had different pains. They were related, but they were pain. Okay. How do you solve that pain, or what does digital maturity look like? Well, first off, you have to care. You have to actively care. So it has to be a priority to improve your experience. But to improve your experience, you have to get better at getting better. So you have to make an organization that knows how to innovate. You don't know what you're going to innovate, but you have to be able to innovate. And the realization is that what you're really doing is you're building a digital platform. This hurt digital beginners. This was tough. Even now, growing up is not easy to do. Growing up is hard to do. And digital beginners were dealing with this. But some of them tried to find a middle ground. So they customized their legacy platforms. And they made APIs. Because they figured, oh, API first, I'll get my legacy and I'll stick some APIs on it. Some of them waited for their vendors to give them their new API first version. And others bought the vendor SaaS platforms. And I see some heads nodding, and it's not nodding as in, oh, that was awesome. It was, oh my God, this happened. Yeah, okay, so this is familiar to you. So there's one more dimension to this whole problem that I didn't mention before, and that's the problem of upgrading. And here's a little bit better term that the industry came up with. Monolith, a little bit better than headless. But a monolith is an e-commerce system that has everything tightly coupled inside of it. So if you want to upgrade one thing, you upgrade everything. If one thing sucks, you have to wait for all the other stuff to justify its upgrade. So how do you know if you have a monolith? It's really difficult to tell. right? Because you ask somebody, oh, is this a monolith? Is this microservices? They'll tell you whatever they're going to tell you to get you out of their office. So here's a sniff test for you. If your vendor's inventory update can save you $1 million a year, but the labor to upgrade will cost you $1 million and take a year, you might have a monolith. So this is, if anybody has experienced this before. Okay, so enter microservices. So what's the deal with headless and microservices? These modern providers had to rewrite their stuff from scratch. They built it on API first principles and on microservices. So what did this do for them? Well, first, what it did for you is it lets you move faster. APIs are what everything speaks. And when your commerce system speaks APIs, you're all speaking the same language. When you are API first, you can engage with any touch point. You don't have to wait for the vendor to upgrade you to deal with a new touch point, because the touch points are coming out every couple of months. And a core design principle of these microservices is that they're small enough to be manageable and updatable. So your software can always be current version. So what does this do for your vendor? The vendor can move faster. And when your vendor moves faster, you get the cool new stuff faster, and you can put it to use. So everybody moves faster. Oh, and by the way, you can hire developers. You can hire developers. These are folks who they're steeped in Agile. They came up in an API world. You don't have to hire e-commerce developers who have experience on one 10-year-old platform. That is a pain to recruit. So all of this allows everyone to move faster. That's the real key here. Now, what happens when everybody moves faster? Well, first off, there's no other way to accomplish this. In the old days, it was like playing ping pong with wrist weights. You just could not move fast enough to hit that target. You're all consumers. You're all having digital experiences. You're going to go back to the office with a hypothesis. I think this will be awesome. And you can test it. And if you have a hunch, you can find out with data if that hunch pays out. So can everybody on your team. This is how designers work. So now you're legitimately designing your commerce experiences. This is something that you were not able to do before. Maybe you could do wireframes. Maybe you could do content. Maybe you could do great photography, but you certainly couldn't design in an agile way the entire commerce experience. You can now with this. Everyone moves faster. This lets you make the right experience and make that experience right. And there's more. Because any new touch point that comes on the scene can be exploited. Furthermore, as you discover with your users what other touch points are in their lives, you can have a presence there. So where are all these touch points? Phone apps, watch apps, the kiosks in the airport, 7-Eleven is doing some stuff, progressive web apps, which frankly are crushing it on engagement because they play that great middle ground between mobile app and web native, and the conversion rates are crazy on these things. And marketplaces. So marketplaces are a touch point. Marketplaces, when you list your stuff on Amazon, they send you an order. They send it over API. All of these marketplaces do. And there's also this dropship stuff. Now, I want to get into a little bit about dropship to illustrate how deep this headless architecture goes. If you're a retailer and you want to expand your assortment, you can dropship that stuff. Okay? You get the catalog, you send the order, all that stuff's over APIs. You're not customizing the monolith with some wonky integration. But if you're on the other end, if you're a brand manufacturer, you're getting orders from all of your new retail partners who come online really fast. So remember Pinterest at last Shop Talk in February when they announced that thing with Levi's? Pinterest has visual search that lets you get down to things that you don't have words for in fashion, and Levi's is just getting orders from that. So your suppliers, if you're a retailer, your suppliers are looking at you, and you are part of their B2B program. So this is a supply chain. What we see is between the consumer and the retail business, headless makes total sense. Just keep walking to the left there. Orders are flowing. There's legacy technology in there. There are new players. And we're not just shipping pallets, we're shipping eaches, we're drop shipping. Right in that middle is also being disrupted by headless technologies or headless architectures. So let's take an example. Walmart, they buy pallets of paper towels, and they use this thing called EDI, electronic data interchange. It's how you get two ERPs to talk together. It's like a railroad. It's super efficient. It's not agile. It's actually difficult. If anybody's worked in it, it's okay. Yeah, it's not the greatest thing. But there's a whole bunch of awesome new brands coming on the scene. And I'd wager a bet that these new brands are not stoked on EDI. However, these ordering platforms enable, and there's players out in the market that will even translate from EDI into API. So now these guys are coming on the scene with machine-to-machine ordering based on APIs, following all the principles of headless, right? That's what's so cool about it, is the same way that you can improve humans' customer experience, you can improve the experience with machine-to-machine. So if you're a wholesaler, then the retailer sending you orders, you need to think about them as a digital touch point as well. I bet you didn't think that you'd hear a guy tell you that an ERP can be a digital touch point. I hope not. Okay, so where do you buy all this stuff from? This is a lot of stuff. We already said that you don't want to buy it, and you can't buy it from a single vendor. Leaders like you are partnering with these new school SIs, agencies, who are providing blueprints of best of breed that can fit your needs, and they're helping you with this agile transformation and with getting into design thinking. In essence, they're giving you complete solutions. The solutions themselves are componentized and flexible, and you're not tied to a single vendor. Now, there's still room in the market for an all-in-one solution. Let's say Shopify. Everybody knows about this. That's how they architect it behind the scenes. They have good enough stuff, but if you want to build differentiated experiences, this is when you turn to best-of-breed architectures, or best-of-breed components within your headless architecture. So you would be doing this work anyway. When you buy into headless, you would be selecting all the components, you would be integrating them, yada, yada, yada. The agencies jumpstart you on that process. And you use them for as long as you want. You use them as long as it takes for you to transform your organizations into agile organizations. Change management is not to be underestimated. Agencies will help you there. And then the final point, mega vendors with their roll-ups. No hate on mega vendors. I'm just talking about the economics at play here. They're making a business case for their acquisitions. If you have a partner, if you have a partner assembling these things, it's based on a meritocracy. So you have another level of assurance that you're getting top-notch, best of breed. So, in summary, Headless was intended to solve the problem of disconnected experiences. Microservices make your APIs always current. And leaders like you are turning to new school SIs to jumpstart the build-out of their experience architecture. So why is this analyst so bullish on Headless? One, because it's bigger than just commerce. Two, this is how you get the agility you need, and there is no other way. There's no other way to get this same level of agility that headless architectures offer you. And then finally, you're tapping into the innovation in the ecosystem. So please read my report, The New Commerce Revolution, Off with Their Heads or Not, and engage with the Forrester Analyst. And thank you guys for your time.